Let me start with the historic farmers' struggle. When the struggle ended, I said the biggest achievement of the farmers' struggle is not that the three farm laws have been repealed. Of course, they were repealed. Of course, that was a big achievement. But to my mind, that was not the biggest achievement. I mean, after all, it was an additional nuisance which was removed. In that sense, farmers did not gain anything fresh from that movement. What they gained, I said, was farmers at a political constituency had arrived on the national stage. Farmers who had been junked into a dustbin of history had risen and had announced that, yes, we exist, we matter. That to me was the biggest achievement of the farmers' movement, which had two implications. One, that there was a unity of farmers' movement, which was very, very unusual. Remember, farmer movement in this country have always been fragmented on regional lines, fragmented on caste lines within a region, fragmented on class lines, upper and landless labor, landed farmers and landless labor, fragmented on crop lines within Uttar Pradesh, the sugarcane farmer and potato farmer and the wheat farmer have nothing that they share with each other. So historically, farmers' movement has been very fragmented. And therefore, to bring it together was a very unusual achievement. The division has also been on political ideological lines. There has been a tradition of farmers' movement, which is associated with landed farmers, represented by Tiket, by Sharad Joshi, and so on, and partly Nanjundasamy. There has been a left farmers' movement associated primarily with sharecroppers or landless labor. There has been an environmental farmers' movement, smaller but ideologically significant, a Gandhian-inspired environmentalist movement. For the first time, all these trends were brought together in the historic farmers' movement. And one corollary of that was that for the first, after a very, very long time, farmers' movement evolved an agenda of its own, a shared agenda. If you remember, in the 1980s, the demand of the farmer movement was remunerative prices. This is what they were demanding. This is what Tiket was demanding. This is what Sharad Joshi was demanding. Nanjundasamy was demanding, late 80s, early 90s. But that was not a consensual demand. The demand was rejected by the left. If you would recall at that time, left was certainly not with these movements. They said these are movements of the rich peasants, of the kulaks, and that they do not quite represent the demands of Indian farmers. And there was suspicion of those who took environmental concerns seriously. They also thought that demands of this kind could be ruinous for Indian agriculture. It is only the historic achievement of this farmers' movement was that it arrived at a consensus charter of demand of the farmers, which included the concerns of the landless labor, which included the concerns of sharecroppers, of tenant farmers, and landed farmers. From all this emerged some of the key demands. The farmer movement had passed a historic charter, which has been adopted. So these are very important developments. All this sets the stage for what is happening today. The farmers movement, the Delhi Morcha was withdrawn in December 2022. The government basically made only one concession: 3 laws will be repealed. Everything else that they promised was wishy-washy. We'll set up a committee to go into MSP and everything else. If you remember, The farmers stayed back in Delhi almost for 1 month after the Prime Minister's announcement of withdrawal of repeal of three bills. And why? Because farmers said, we want MSP, we want to take something for MSP. Given the situation of the farmers' movement, it did not materialize. The farmers' movement could not. I mean, my own sense is if we could stay for another month, we could have had much bigger concessions at that moment. But for various reasons, it did not happen. The Morcha was withdrawn. And on MSP, all that we got was a committee. And the committee was a very wishy-washy committee. The farmers' movement decided to boycott that committee because the committee was not even, the issue of assured MSP was not even on the agenda of that committee. We expected nothing to come out of it. And of course, nothing came out of it. As we know, the committee has had some 35 meetings without any conclusion. Give it another 5 years and it would have no other conclusion. This is bound to be the case. So a certain resentment has been building up. Farmers have been feeling cheated. And what we have witnessed in the last few weeks is now foregrounding of MSP as the principal demand of the farmers. So what we see now is the emergence of MSP as the frontal demand of the farmers' movement. It was always there. As I mentioned, during the historic farmer struggle, this was demand number 2, but it was never foregrounded. Now it has been foregrounded for the first time. Throughout the country, farmers' movement have come up with one point agenda. Although technically, as you would see, there are many things. There is the demand about loan waiver. There are other issues that farmers have raised. There are issues about landless labor, about Manrega and so on. But the one flagship demand is MSP. What exactly is the demand? We should know. Because again, after a long time, farmers' movement has actually come up with a reasonably clear understanding of what is it that they are demanding. When we say we want legal guarantee of MSP, what we want is a threefold thing. Number one, that in essence, what we are demanding is that every farmer should be entitled to receiving a price which is at least as much as the government's own MSP, calculated at Swaminathan Commission's rates. So there are 3 components to it. Number one, farmers are saying that price assurance mechanism should be available for all agricultural produce. Currently, as you know, the government announces it only for 23 crops, mainly cereals. There are, and then a couple of other things. But it is not available for fruits and vegetables. Some state governments have it, but there is no central protection for that. And not for dairy, not for poultry and fishery or whatever. So the first thing farmers want is expansion of the range of crops or produce for which MSP, this assured price, is available. Number 2, farmers want the price itself to be calculated differently. That is to say, so in that sense, Swaminathan Commission formula comes handy, but we should not forget that C2 price had been recommended actually by Abhijit Sen committee in 2003-4. This was during Vajpayee's regime. Abhijit Sen had led a high-powered committee on long-term food policy, which had already suggested that we should move away from A2 cost. These are partial ways of calculating the cost of farmers, that we should move to a comprehensive cost calculation, which is called C2 in the Government of India's language. Basically, the idea is that when you calculate the farmer's cost, it is not only the paid out cost, things that farmers spend from their pocket and are aware of, but it should also include their own unpaid family labor. Plus, it should also include the rent on their land and the interest on their own investment, exactly the way it would be done for any commercial establishment. So that was acknowledged. Farmers want their cost to be calculated at C2 level. and they want to have margin that is at least 50% over and above that cost. That is a formula recommended by Swaminathan Commission. Now, many people are asking, why 50%? Why not 60? Why not 40? Well, I mean, these are rule of thumb. Why is it that we want 33% for women's reservation? Why not 30? Why not 35? Why not 40? Well, these things historically settle on some claim, and the settlement has taken place at 50%, which is what Swaminathan Commission recommended. So that's the second part of the demand, that MSP should be C2 plus 50% should be the formula used for calculating the MSP. This is the minimum at which MSP should be pegged. It can be more than that, but it should not fall below that. And the third part of the demand is that it should not just be an assurance. It should not merely be a policy. It has to be a legal guarantee. Because with historic experience, farmers have realized that nothing else works in this country. No oral assurance is worth the space on which it's aired. Even Sarkari schemes have no. I mean, the governments pass these schemes, government give assurance on the floor of the parliament, and then they forget about it. So if it is not legal guarantee, it just doesn't work. That is why farmers have made this demand. So the demand for what is called legal guarantee of MSP has these three components. Farmers' movement has also developed some understanding of how it should be implemented. In fact, in some ways, farmers' movement has moved beyond the government economists. The farmers' movement has at least developed an understanding. It's moved beyond two very popular misconceptions. One misconception was that in order to give guarantee to MSP, the government has to purchase all the crops. And in fact, that is the biggest confusion. And since all of us are interested in this question, maybe Kavita will speak more about it. But this is one basic confusion we have to remove. That we have generally people equate MSP with government procurement. And the moment someone says we need legal guarantee of MSP, it is assumed that what we are asking for is a legal guarantee of procurement of all the crops. And then, of course, all kinds of objections come up, some of which are very reasonable objections, that you cannot possibly purchase all the commodities, that it's not a very economically sensible thing to do so, and that it would open gates for corruption, for wastage, for all those things. Farmers' movement has now arrived at a situation to say, okay, we are not interested in procurement per se. We are simply saying, I, as a farmer, should receive this much for my effort, whether it comes from government or for any other mechanism. The government should ensure that it happens. We do not insist on government procurement. And the second misconception from which the farmers' movement has moved away is...
Can I interrupt here and translate?
I'll just finish this one sentence, and then you can translate.
Okay.
The second misconception from which the farmers' movement has moved away is the idea that the government simply has to legislate and say that no sale or purchase should take place below MSP, and that would solve the problem. Because I still find many farmers leaders saying so, that you just have to make a law, make it illegal to buy or sell below the MSP. Farmers' movement has realized that no, that's not the way, because that's a cheap escape for the government. Government would be very happy to pass such a legislation because they know that nothing would actually happen. These legislations do exist in many states already in the APMC Act. Nothing happens because of these legislations, because basically, if the market prices are substantially below the MSP, you cannot force the traders to purchase on that. They would simply close down the shutter and open a back window from where the farmers will have to come and sell in black and for much lower price. So farmer movement is now saying, no, we don't want it to be realized. So it's a threefold demand, and we have moved away from two popular misconceptions. Farmers are saying there are much smarter ways of doing so. We want a bouquet of policies. which include expanded procurement, which include market intervention, which include deficit payment. That is what we want. I'll not get into the details of these three because Kavita is here and she is a much better spokesperson and she expands on it much better than I could. But the important thing is that for the first time, farmers' movement has come up with a clear solution. And that is what gives power to this particular movement. The final section now, I'll just come to the politics of it. Right. So I'm skipping this thing about how exactly MSP can be realized. Right. And how much it will cost, is it possible or not? All these things have been, very carefully handled by the farmers' movement this time. For once, there is a clear shift in public debate. For all these years that I've been watching public debate on this question, people like Kiran and me and Kavita, we were always on the defensive, having to argue all kinds of things. For the first time, this time I felt that, a lot of people from the other side of the divide also have stood up this time. So something has shifted in the public mood. And that is not only because of arguments. I think it's because of the politics of it. The rise of farmers as a political constituency. And that's what I want to speak about finally. Not going to fizzle out. This issue is here to stay. It's also noteworthy that for the first time, Congress party has backed it verbatim. You would recall, Congress had appointed Swaminathan Commission. Congress did not implement it. Even in 2019, when Congress was in opposition, Congress did not back this issue, did not make this promise. This time, for the first time, Congress has come out openly saying legal guarantee of MSP as per Swaminathan Commission formula. And my expectation is that this would become a demand of the entire India bloc. And if it becomes, this is a serious electoral issue for 2024. But even beyond 2024, I think the emergence of farmers is one of the biggest political development of this country, because in some ways, farmers provide the backbone of resistance that this country needs today. 3 or 4 different issues fuse in here. First, the issue of equality, which is agriculture, rural India being discriminated against and industrial urban India being preferred. Second, a serious protest against corporatization, because the demand of NSP and the rise of the farmers' movement is perhaps the strongest protest in the country against corporatization and handing over country to corporate. Today was a protest against WTO. No other person, no other movement is talking about WTO. Farmers are talking about WTO. 3, it is the environmental concerns, which is being articulated, because farmers are going to be the first victims of climate change in a big way. And finally, issues of federalism and democracy are also being raised by farmers' movement. So if I were to draw upon the old Marxist language of a vanguard of history, the idea that there is, in each phase of history, there is one class whose self-interest happens to coincide with the interest of forward movement of history. Then in today's India, farmers represent that. Farmers are that one class which has the capacity to organize itself, which has the clout, which has the weight, a certain kind of moral weight as well, because for everything this regime tries, they simply cannot villainize farmers. While they can villainize Muslims, they can villainize all protesters, they can villainize human rights activists, they cannot villainize farmers. So farmers have that kind of strength. And the current farmers movement has that capacity to articulate the agenda which is the agenda for taking India forward. Farmers, in that sense, represent the force of resistance that this country needs. Farmers provide that force for reclaiming the republic, politics of defending our republic, defending our values of diversity, democracy, and struggle for equality. This is why farmers' movement is critical, will continue to be critical till 24 election, and more importantly, beyond 24 election, because I've been arguing that we are now in a phase where oppositional parliamentary politics of opposition will become less and less relevant, and politics of resistance will be more and more important. And in that, farmers have a salient, vital, pivotal role to play. Thank you.